G'day, Trent from Total Tools. Here to help you out with some quick troubleshooting tips on petrol engine drive power equipment, the most common ones anyway. And what is that? That's things like plate compactors, helicopters, pressure cleaners, drive units, generators. We've also got them on cement mixers and air compressors and a few other things out there. The most common ones out there are the Honda GX motors or the Honda GX style motors. They're all tend to have the same things go wrong with them regardless of the type or brand. You're talking the style that we're showing you is like the Honda GX, available in a few different sizes, Honda GP, and you've got the Honda style motors, similar to the GX. So we want to cover the top 6 most common issues people are having out there, and hopefully this video will help you be able to get things running up pretty quickly and get back to work straight away. It doesn't matter if it is a genuine Honda GX, whether it's the Honda GP motor or even the GX style motor, the same things tend to go wrong, and most of the time they're pretty simple. Troubleshooting tip number 1, and the most common thing we see with motor issues, and that is having enough oil. The good thing about all these motors is they have a low oil cut switch in them. So if there's not enough oil in the thing, it won't start and prevent you from causing all sorts of damage to the motor. That also means though, that you need to really fill them right up. So the tip is, they take around 1 litre of oil, depending on the motor. Some of the bigger motors take a bit more, some of the smallers a bit less. Don't pay too much attention to the dipstick, but you fill up one side until it starts dribbling out the other side, pretty much like that motor there. That's the perfect amount of oil in it. The other thing you need to do when you're running the units, if you're not on level ground, make sure you're sloping the motor towards the switch so that it's getting plenty of oil. If you slope it away, you can start, it's a float switch inside and it can cut the machine out. A lot of the time machines come in, people say it won't start or won't run, and it's usually because there's not enough oil. Troubleshooting tip number 2 is make sure that when you're not using the unit, turn the fuel off. We quite often see what happens is when people have a full tank of fuel and they put it away with the fuel on, that can drain its way through the carburetor and into the oil in the sump of the motor. Now that doesn't matter whether it is an expensive high-end Honda GX motor or one of the GX style motors or even the GP motor. We see that issue across the board. What happens then is you end up with a hydrolocking situation because you've got too much fluid in the sump, and that causes issue with trying to start them. They don't really like it. You can always tell when you open the oil cap, fuel-soaked oil will come pouring out of the unit. So then you know you've got an issue. Quite simple to fix. It's a matter of draining the oil out and putting fresh oil in. I can't stress enough how important it is to make sure that when you finish using the machine to turn the fuel off. We are seeing a change in the market that some of the new Briggs & Stratton motors out there actually have the power switch related to the fuel switch so that you can't run the machine without turning the fuel on or off. Troubleshooting tip number 3, believe it or not, is use the choke when you're starting. Most of them have a 2-stage choke, but it's important that you use the choke most times. Now there's always exceptions to the rule, and sometimes you just got to give it a go without the choke to see if it'll start. But even when they're warmed up or they're hot or you've just finished using them, they do like to have the choke put on to be able to get the thing started. And it does work like a bit of a hot start. You might only have to use it halfway. Have the right revs, be ready to quickly turn the choke off so it can run and idle, but it is very important that the choke gets used. Troubleshooting tip number 4 is fuel. You want to make sure you've got fresh fuel, clean fuel, and really try to avoid ethanol-based fuels. The ethanol fuels can go stale fairly quick and they also attract moisture, so not good unless you're using a whole fresh batch of it at the time. We generally try to say stay away from it. Some of the manufacturers out there do say just don't use it flat out. And also make sure that you keep the fuel fairly fresh and clean. Any dirt, any stale fuel is going to cause issues with the carburetor. Lucky though, it is quite simple to fix. It might be just a flush out of the tank, clean of the carburetor, and it's ready to go again. Troubleshooting tip number 5 is check your spark plug. If nothing else is working, if the unit's not firing at all, it's a good idea to check the spark plug. They tend to last a fair while, but depending on whether you've had any dirty fuel or anything else go wrong, or you can just be unlucky and get a faulty spark plug, it's a pretty simple fix. And finally, troubleshooting tip number 6, and that is ripcord. We quite often see broken ripcords, and usually it's because something else has caused it to break. Most of the time the ripcords will last a very long time. If the ripcord, when you go to start it, is tight or hard to move, check the rest of the unit. It might be something else that's causing it. In a pressure cleaner, it can be that you've got too much water pressure in the other end that's putting pressure on the motor. You've got to release that pressure when you're starting the unit, and it should pull freely. If the ripcord is feeling hard to pull, always stop and check, don't force it. That's when we see breakages. Okay, so there's a couple of pretty simple starting procedures for these motors. Slightly different between hot and cold, so we'll go through the cold start procedure. Obviously you've already done your fuel and your oil. It's ignition on, throttle about halfway, fuel on, choke on, and a steady pull. Once you hear the rev starting to struggle, off with the choke, and you can let it idle for a little bit just to warm it up, and then when you're ready to go, crank the revs up. Okay, for a hot motor it's slightly different. As I said earlier on in the video, even when these motors are hot, they still generally need the choke to start. It acts like sort of a hot start, chokes it off a bit, gets it running. So we've been running this pump for a little while. We're going to show you the hot start procedure. Very similar to cold start. Ignition on, fuel on, choke on. Now you can play with the choke. It might sometimes only need halfway, sometimes might need it at all, but generally when you're having trouble starting it hot, it's because you need to do the choke. Once we get it started, there'll be a slight difference, and that is you've got to get the choke off pretty quick. We've got half throttle again, gentle pull, and get that choke off. If you don't get the choke off quick enough, it will stall. When you're ready to go, full revs. Turning it off is pretty simple, but you want to get yourself in the habit of turning the revs down, fuel off, ignition off, and we're done. So there you have it. That's the top most common troubleshooting tips for petrol engine drive power equipment. We tend to find these motors are very reliable. They do cop a lot of punishment and abuse, but as with everything, it depends on how well you treat it and how good you are with your maintenance as to how long you're going to get out of the motors. It's always pays to change the oil. It's the cheapest, easiest maintenance. It's only around 1 litre of oil in each unit, so it doesn't cost much at all. Change the oil after the first 5 hours once the machine's fully run in, and then you don't have to change it till another 30 to 35 hours. Just keep an eye on the oil. If it's getting dark and dirty, you know it's time to change. Anyhow, that's enough for me. As always, like, comment, subscribe. We'll see you soon.